Occult-Cast proudly presents the Hermetic Qabalah for new and advanced students, narrated by Frater Wimser. Before there was anything, there were three veils of negative existence. Negative in that these are things that do not manifest in what we would consider actual existence. They are so abstract that we can only mathematically grasp them. These are things that no matter how hard we try, and I challenge you to do so, try to actually get into the states of nothingness, called in Hebrew ein, or simply just non-existent, no thing. This is the state where absolutely nothing exists. And if you try really hard, you will be forced to conclude, even in your own mind, that nothingness is not simply the lack of thoughts in your mind. It is not simply your eyes closed and seeing darkness or the color black. But these things are still ourselves. When we do this, we are putting ourselves into these thoughts. So it is not nothing. We may try to think of nothing. And again, try yourself. But all of these veils of negative existence are such that the human mind cannot grasp. Starting with ein, or no thing, nothingness, the absence of all things. The second veil, ein sof, the unlimited, or the infinite, that which just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, and never stops and never began. Finally, the ein sof or, the unlimited light, which I like to think of as unlimited potential or energy. But I think potential is even better, because this is sort of like when anybody says anything is possible, that is Ein Sof, unlimited possibility. But like I said before, these are unexisting. But for us to consider existence, we must formulate things that we can say exist. Thus, these three veils condense into a bright point, a point where all things are at once. What was once non-existent, or not, or never being existing, coalesce into Kether, the crown, the very first emanation of existence. At this point, all things exist as one. This is the wholeness of reality. It is the Big Bang, where everything is, was, and will be all at once, where all matter exists from the past to the now to the future, all in one. And Kether, the crown, is characterized by number 1 on the tree of life. Some note-taking for this class. You see on all these slides to the left the glyph of the tree of life of the Qabalah. The tree of life of the Qabalah represents everything that exists, both without thy and within thee. The tree of life represents you, the microcosm. The tree of life represents the entire universe, the macrocosm. Further, each individual sphere from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, all exist within each other sphere. So within one exists the entire tree. Within two exists the entire tree. Within three exists the entire tree. And so on unto 10. Thus we have a mystical decimal system where we can expand on any one of these spheres, called Sephiroth when plural, or Sephirah when singular. We can go into any one of these and expand on the rest of the tree within it. So the goal of the Kabbalah is to start from 10, though we're going to be going into the slideshow from 1 to 10 in the order of emanation. We as human beings climb the tree. So we start off as 10 in our bodies and gradually learn about ourselves through the spheres as we unfold ourselves, unfold our life, climbing the tree, until we are finally rejoined into Kether, the one true God. Instead of referring to Kether as God, I will refer to it as the all. As in all there was, all there is, all there will be. All that is male, all that is female, all that is both, all that is neither, and all that are in between. For if there was anything that existed outside of the all would not be all. It is really that simple. The Kether is the all. All things exist within it. And Kether itself is the root of creation. All things come from the all, and all things end up in the all. And yet, the all in its infinite oneness is just one thing. And as one thing, there is no separateness within the all. And thus the all, in order to experience itself, must shine forth in a beam of light, ever becoming from that first initial point of Kether, going forward ever and ever to a second point. And thus we come to the number 2 on the tree of life. Chokmah, or wisdom. It is the wisdom of me and not me. Or me, the individual, and the all which is apart from me. Or here we can rightly say God apart from me, because in number 2 in Chokmah is attributed to God the Father, Yud of the Tetragrammaton, the Knights of the Tarot being the court cards with a man on a horse representing action. Chokmah represents the phallus or the penis, the ultimate male energy, the root of maleness, the root of force. Being in contradiction to 3. Again, looking at the tree of life on the left, we are talking about 2 Chokmah. But to understand Chokmah, we will talk briefly now about 3 Binah. Understanding that is the feminine to Chokmah's male. Thus we see on 2 pillars. The right pillars are male, the left pillars are female. And since we have not gotten to 3, it is not yet time to talk about the 3rd pillar. But as said, Chokmah is the true will of each individual. That is, the true will that governs all of our existence, whether being this incarnation or the next. It is the entire plan of ourselves throughout the entirety of creation, the entirety of our lives. And as we are talking about two, I will segue first into saying that the tree of life is like a filing cabinet for the mind and soul. Thus, if you see a number 1, everything that you can think of that is 1 belongs there. Any religion about wholeness, holiness, being holistic is all 1. 2, everything that is 2, all polarities, all dualities, male and female, hot and cold, positive and negative, etc., etc. And on the tree we see 2 directions. The first obvious direction, simply counting the numbers from 1 to 10, gives us the lightning bolt. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, ever becoming denser from spirit of Kether to the matter of Malkuth at its base. That is the direction of divinity and the direction of creation. But, as I briefly spoke of before, there is also the direction of initiation, becoming and living as a human, starting off from the body and gradually climbing the tree, but not just through the spheres called the Sephiroth, but also through the paths, those lines between the spheres called the Navatoth, like navigate. The other direction, the tree, which starts from 10 and goes to 1, does not follow the lightning bolt, but instead follows the coiling serpent rising up the tree, similar to the Kundalini of the East. This winding serpent winds through each and every path of the tree, giving the initiate, the liver of life, the opportunity to live through all of life's experiences. Which brings us into 3, Binah, understanding. Here we see the Divine Mother, the Holy Goddess, the starry sky of creation, Nuit, the sky goddess, 2 Chokmahs, number 2's maleness. We have now the feminine creative power, where Chokmah directs and motivates. Chokmah is the word. Binah is the creation from that word. It is always pregnant with the word. Whatever word you feed into her is what she creates. This is the recipe of the Immaculate Conception. The Holy Word of God indwells within the Holy Mother Goddess of creation, giving birth to all things. And she is 3, the triangle. Whereas Chokmah was a line connecting 2 points and one-dimensional. Whereas Kether, 1, had no dimension, but was only a point, was only position. Binah, being a triangle, is a plane. It is 2-dimensional. Here we can draw images. It is the root of all form and of perception. For to perceive anything, you need three things. 1, the thing you are trying to perceive, such as an object. 2, that which is perceiving, the subject. And 3, that which measures between, such as a measuring device. These are reflected in the 3 mother letters of Hebrew. Shin is fire in male. Mem is water in female. Air and Aleph is both male and female, which decides between them, which are similar to the sulfur of fire in alchemy, the salt-like water of alchemy, and the mercury-like air in alchemy. Also, this is a good opportunity to look at your tarot cards. And if you do not have any tarot cards, I strongly recommend the Thoth Tarot by Aleister Crowley and Mrs. Lady Harris. I have 3 of these cards shown here representing the mother letters. The Fool is that airy component of Aleph. The Eon card is Shin and fire, and it's the last judgment in older tarot cards like Rider-Waite. And finally, the Hanged Man is Mem and water. Together we have the Holy Trinity of creation that exists behind the abyss. That is to say, this exists on the holiest of levels. That are to say, divine and archetypical of us, yet still within our mental grasp. Whereas Chokmah was the sphere of the zodiac, 3, Binah, is Saturn, or rather Saturn corresponds to her. Since we're talking about 3, we have 3 pillars. The white pillar, or at least depicted as white here, on the right, is that of mercy. The black pillar on the left is that of severity. And the gray pillar in the center is that of equilibrium. It can also be thought of as the pillar of mildness, or some would say the pillar of consciousness. For this is where, when we attain to different degrees of consciousness, we unfold. Always with our right hand powers to the left. The right hand powers to our right and the left hand powers to our left. With our back against the tree, we can superimpose ourselves onto the tree, but more on that later. We have 3 triangles on the tree, represented here as an upward pointed red supernal triangle, representing the most divine of the tree. Then a yellow downward pointing ethical or moral triangle, and a blue downward magical or sometimes practical triangle. The ethical and moral is actually pretty self-explanatory. That is where we wrestle with our ethics and morals. The magical triangle is where we wrestle between our intellect and our emotions and our creative facility thereby. And finally, 3 parts of the soul. Starting from the bottom, we have Malkuth, which I have circled in green. It's called the Nefesh, and is also attributed here to the physical body and the autonomic nervous system. Granted, you can control your breathing, but usually you don't have to. Just as also the same for your heart. These are the things that are automatic that you do not need to control or just simply don't control without years of yogic discipline. So your hungers, your sex drive, all of these types of things would be like your nephesh part of your soul, which might even extend into Yesod, that first sphere right above Malkuth on the bottom. The Ruach is the middle part of the soul. And as you see, it is circling 6 Sephiroth on the tree. More about those later. But this is here where people, this is the part of soul that you likely think of as you. Especially for those of you who don't think of their body as you anymore. This is the part of the soul that you kind of think of as you. It has like all of your morality. It has all of your thinking, your feeling, all of your, all of the faculties of choice and of experience for the regular human life would be the Ruach. And finally, the highest part of the soul, which we aspire to receive its wisdom, is the Neshama, which corresponds to the entire supernal triangle on the tree of life. And we also can break this part of the soul down into 3 subparts of this higher part of the soul. The Neshama, which is the entirety, is also thought of as Binah, number 3 in the tree of life. Again, just look to the left to see where the numbers are. The Neshama is sort of like this, the highest part of the high ego, the higher self, not the ego that gets us into trouble. The Chia corresponds to Chokmah and 2. That is our true individuality. That is how we are different from the Almighty, from the All. And finally, the Yechida. That is the highest aspect of our soul and the part of our soul that is the All. For more understanding of this, I suggest contemplation and meditation. In fact, all of the tree of life is much better spent meditating and contemplating than reading about. I recommend that you read extensively about the tree, but you cannot experience something holy until you experience it. Make this a part of your life, and you will be rewarded thereby. Join me now as we descend below the abyss. Da'ath. Knowledge. This type of knowledge is not what you read in books. This is more akin to the experience of life. And it is not, strictly speaking, a Sephirah. It is a non-Sephirah. Not actually part of the tree, but representing the veil between the supernal triangle and the rest of the tree of life. This is where, if you were to climb the tree in toto, you'd be forced to cross this abyss and throw off the last of your earthly humanity, the last of your desires, as you ascend to demigodhood above. Not necessarily in, but likely after death. It is attributed to Uranus of astrology. It can also be representative of the supernal triangle above, but in the realm of our experience. Now that we have crossed the abyss, we come to the very first manifest sphere. Chesed, mercy, 4. This is peace. It is joy. It is humanity love, as opposed to romantic love, which we will get to later. The love of all people, animals, plants, all things would go here. Joy, compassion and mercy, forgiveness and generosity, wealth, abundance, expansion, and fortune, patience, peace, faith, and stillness. In contrast to number 5 on the left on the tree of life from it, which is strength and severity, and more on that later. But we see here another polarity. First, we saw the polarity of wisdom and understanding above in 2 and 3. Now, it is the moral polarity of mercy and strength. More on strength later. But mercy, as I said, is Jupiter. It is the 4s of the tarot, which reminds me, 3s of the tarot belong to Binah. And if you see a number on the tarot, just attribute that to the same number on the tree of life, considering the minor arcana. Getting back to the stillness element here. This is sort of like in the very early still morning, where a pond or lake is completely still. If it were any more still, it'd be frozen. But here it is just still. The order of the AA attributes memory to this sphere. Memory would be a snapshot in time. It is still. We do not get to motion until the next sphere of number 5, but here it is still. It also represents anything and everything that is 4. 4 types of DNA, or rather 4 chemical elements of the DNA. 4 seasons. 4 elements, etc. If you can think of anything 4, it goes here. Which brings us to the 4 worlds of the Kabbalah. As I've said before, each sphere contains the other spheres. But what I did not mention before is that each sphere has its own rules. So, each sphere is its own independent system. Thus here we have the 4 worlds, or the 4 elements, which are not the same as the 5 elements, which include a spirit element. Here we have fire, water, air, and earth. And that is all you need. All you need for this filter, for this Sephiroth, for this emanation is 4. So the tree of life is one system in itself containing 10 spheres and 22 paths of wisdom. By the way, since we're still taking 4, when we take 4 and add all the numbers to it that are under it, or less than it, we have 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, which is equal to 10, as in the 10 spheres. The 22 paths, if you take 22 and say 2 plus 2, it is also equal 4. That said, knowing that the tree in itself is its own system in and of itself, but each sphere has in it their own subsystems, let us get back to the 4 worlds of the Kabbalah, which are representative of the Tetragrammaton. the most holy name of God. Yud, the first Hebrew letter going from right to left, is attributed to the first world, the Absolute. This is the divine world, the world of archetypes, and in ceremonial magic, the world of God or goddess or gods. The second letter, He, is attributed to the Bria, the creative world of the archangels. The third world, attributed to the letter Vav or Vow, is called the Yetzirah, the formative world, the world of formation. This is where all symbols and words and thoughts can be intellectualized, and the dwelling of the angels. And finally, the last letter, He, attributed to the world of the Asiya, the earth, the physical body. The Absolute is fire and represents all of the suit of the wands of the tarot. The Bria is water and represents all the cups of the tarot. The Yetzirah is air and represents all the air of all the swords of the tarot. And the Asiya is earth and represents all the discs of the tarot. And finally, all the knights and that part of you which is God or goddess belongs in the Absolute. In water, it is all of the queens of the tarot and that part of you that is creative and emotional. All of the princes or the seated or throned males of the court cards are air and represents your intellect and reason. And finally, all of the princesses or the or the pages in older tarots, which should be a young woman, are earth and your body. Continuing on with Gevurah. The knights go in the lower right-hand corner. The queens on the upper right-hand corner. The princes on the upper left-hand corner. The princess is on the lower left-hand corner. And trumps would be placed at the very top. Just as to give you an idea of what you can do with the tarot to help you learn your art. We have gone through Chesed and we have gone through Gevurah, the merciful Chesed, and the strong, severe Gevurah. And here in Tiphareth, beauty, equilibrium, harmony. It is the sun. It is the seal of Solomon, the Star of David, the rose cross. That is the cross that is made with 6 squares. It is the cube. It being the sun, it is the center of the tree of life. It brings into equilibrium all things. And in the middle triangle, the ethical triangle, it brings into equilibrium Chesed and Gevurah. This is where your higher self is manifest. It can be attributed to the conscious part of the mind, but the very highest part of that conscious mind. Free from ego, free from conflicting emotion or intellect. It is simply the harmonious beauty of thy soul, of all things. And as the hexagram, shown here on the right, it represents the balance of opposites. It is kind of like the Hermetic yin-yang. Yet this one is more specific. As you gaze into it, you see different planets at the corners of these triangles. And you see how they're opposites, and see how they're reconciled through the hexagram. Thus, this is a symbol to use to invoke planets within thyself and without. And to meditate on this, we can put the appropriate tarot cards using the same attributes as before. The top card is the universe for Saturn. Then going to the upper right corner is Jupiter and Fortune. The upper left corner is the Tower and Mars. The center card is the Sun. The lower right-hand card is the Empress and Venus. The lower left-hand card is the Magus or Magician, depending on your deck, and Mercury. And the bottom card is the Priestess, representing the Moon. Next, we come to the final triangle. We come to the magical triangle, to number 7, Netzach, victory, Venus and Aphrodite. These are thy emotions, affections, attractions, romantic love, lovers, and love making as being different than mere fornication. It is marriage and spouses, seduction, flirtation, and desire. She is paired with number 8, Hod, which is thy intellect and logic. And thus we see in this magical triangle below. On the right, we have our emotional life, emotional experiences, our likes and our dislikes. And on the left at 8, we have our reason. But here in Netzach, we have displayed 2 7-pointed stars called heptagrams with an H or septagrams with an S. And we have many different ways we can attribute the planets here. So you may or may not agree with me. That is fine, and that is your choice. But the order here has the sun at the top, because every day when I look up, I always see the sun, unless it's too cloudy. Starting from the lower left-hand corner, we see Saturn, which is number 3 on the Tree of Life, and following the same numbers on the Tree of Life, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we have the exact same order on this star. So Saturn is 3, Jupiter is 4, going around clockwise, then 5 in Mars, 6 in the Sun, 7 in Venus, 8 in Mercury, and 9 in Yesod. And when these planets are arranged thus, we get something very interesting, which I'll go into after we talk about how Venus is the only astrological symbol that, when drawn on the Tree of Life, encompasses all 10 spheres of emanation. Thus, by an act of romantic love, we may be united with the tree. And just as we have the planets in that particular order on the star, we see that from the sun to the moon, following the acute heptagram in the center and that line that I just drew, we go from the sun, Sunday, to the moon's Monday, and we follow forth from the moon to Mars to Tuesday, which, if thou knowest any romantic languages such as French, that would be mardi, like Mars. Following Mars along the heptagram, we get to Mercury, Mercredi, Wednesday. Going to Jundi, Jupiter, Thursday. Going to Vanjadi, Friday, and Venus. And finally to Saturday, Saturn. And then back to Sunday. We also have the 7 Hermetic principles of the Qabalah, which will be in the reading list going forth. And here depicted with my own personal symbols. From the very bottom, 7-pointed star, there's mentalism. Then the spiral is correspondence. Then we have vibration, polarity in clockwise order, rhythm, causation, and gender, the 7 Hermetic principles. And I thus put these on here to remind you that anything 7, anything at all, goes to Netzach on the Tree of Life. Next we get to Hod, or glory, Mercury, Hermes, Thathatahuti. This is thy intellect, thy ego of the lower mind. That is the ego that, no, I'm right, not you, that ego. Thy reason, thy logic, mathematics and science, travel, communication, travel, speed and swiftness, communication, truth and facts, objective reality. We have at the center here the chaos star of chaos magicians, followed by 2 versions of the octagram. With the square octagram, we may posit 4 elements positive, or 4 elements masculine, and 4 elements negative, and 4 elements feminine. The 8-pointed star can also be the trigrams of the East. Thus, to show you again, anything 8, anything at all, belongs in Hod. In Hod, we use our reason, our ordered reason, to balance the chaos of our emotions. And finally, once to balance our emotions, our intellect, we have Yesod, foundation, the moon or Luna, the genitals on thy body, receptivity, femininity, religious devotion, sex, sexuality, sexual intercourse, the rising kundalini that opens thy third eye, the imagination, visualization, divination that grant visions of the astral and psychic worlds in the aura around all living things. She is the mistress of magic that funnels all the Sephiroth above her into Malkuth, and thus she is thy subconscious. She is thy subconscious filter. She is what stands between thee and the magic above. The outer nine-pointed star is called the Enneagram. It is a symbol of alleged 9 personality types. The 9-pointed star within alludes to all 3 triangles on the tree now interlaced in perfect union. It is all other things 9 as well. And finally, number 10, Malkuth, sometimes pronounced Malkut with modern Hebrew, which means the kingdom. It is earth. It is all physical matter. It is thy body. It is a reflection of Kether 1, for it is now 1 with a 0 added to it. For like Kether contains all things, it contains the entire physical universe. And when we actually climb the tree and get to Kether, Kether itself will become as a Malkuth, and there'll be another tree before us, for us to climb again to get to Kether, which will become as Malkuth, to climb again and again and again. Thus, if we climb to Kether and become as demigods, we climb again and become even more as gods, again and again and again, never reaching but ever striving for union with the all. The body on the tree of life is depicted as so. In the Hermetic tradition, the tree of life is depicted on thy body as thou backs into the tree. Thus the tree is behind thee, shining from behind, just as in the picture on the right. Thus Kether is right above your head. Chokmah on the left side of your face, Binah on the right side of your face, Chesed on the left part on your left shoulder, Gevurah on your right shoulder, Tiphareth at your solar plexus and heart chakra, Netzach at your left waist, Hod at your right waist, Yesod at your genitals, Malkuth on your feet when you're standing, or your anus when sitting. I pointed out that this is the Hermetic way to put the body on the tree of life. There is another way. The Judaic way would see the tree of life as your reflection. Thus, we are the reflections of God. The Hermetic philosophers see that we are reflections of God as well, but not so literally. Thus, if God were to appear before us, which myself as a Jew do not believe that is a thing, because God is everything. How is that just pop in front of you? But let's just say, for argument's sake, it did. Maybe it looks like the tree of life. You're looking at it as a profile, exactly as it'd be on this page. And it would look at it as you, exactly as it is on this page. Just like when I look at another human being, when I'm staring at them, when I see as the right that I see is their left, and vice versa. That is how the Hermetics, that is how the Hermetics look at it. Jews would look at it as like God is sort of like the mirror image of us in a way. Finally, having talked about all 10 spheres of emanation, we can talk about the Qliphoth, the shells or demons on the tree. These can be interpreted in many different ways. From the point of view of the Golden Dawn and AA, these are like empty husks that have served their usefulness but are ready to be shed. They are previous ideas of the emanations. But as we grow, as we learn, and as we find that some ideas just don't work for us, we shed them. And we have a more filtered, more purified version of those ideas. The Qliphoth are like the shedded ideas, the earlier concepts on the tree. At least this is how it is looked at in the tree from the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn. There are certain so-called left-hand paths that have various ways of looking at the tree of life of the Qliphoth. Sometimes it is depicted as upside down. Sometimes it is still the same, 1 at the top, 10 at the bottom, but this time it has just different names associated with demons. If we were to associate demons in the tree, we would still keep the tree in its same order, but we would just simply think of the demons as things to overcome or things that just are not us anymore. These are sort of like a bonus section because we're not going to get heavily into the Navatoth. But the 32 Navatoth or paths of wisdom correspond to the 22 Hebrew letters. The 3 mother letters, which we discussed in 3 for Binah, represent the grand triplicity of fire, water, and air, male, female, and both, essentially. And in the Hebrew schema, earth does not exist among these elements. Earth are the 3 elements. So you would have fire, water, air, and then the combination of fire, water, air would be earth. So on the tree of life, earth is 10, Malkuth. The mother letters are just fire, water, and air, and they're located on the tree. Then you have 7 paths that represent the planets, the double letters, because they can have 2 different pronunciations. And then the 12 single letters or paths are attributed to the zodiac. That said, if you look at the glyph of the tree of life on the left, the color scheme of the spheres is feminine, called the queen scale, attributed to the Bria from our talk on the 4 worlds. In the Golden Dawn, each world has its own color system, and it is very exciting to learn them all. And if you memorize them and still know them several years after your initiations, congratulations. I'm not sure all of us can retain that. The paths here drawn are the absolutic or king scale colors. Thus, and that's the highest level, sort of like the God level. Thus, all the lines, which perhaps look like penises or male, have a male color scheme. All the spheres, which perhaps look like vaginas, are feminine. Thus, we have on this particular version of the tree, called the Minutum Mundum, the little world. That doesn't sound, yes, the little world, little universe. You have a complete male-female schema, both equal and opposite. There are many different ways to assign the paths to the tree, which you can also assign the tarot, the major arcana tarot cards, all 22, to these 22 paths. These depictions here show two slight variations, for example. But there are other alternate trees. The middle tree is called the Gra version. It is a speculative version of the tree of a time before man fell from Eden. So for those biblical scholars, or for those of us who just went to Sunday school, like me, in the story of Adam and Eve, the tree of life on both the left and the right here represents man as we are now, after Adam and Eve got thrown out of Eden. But the middle tree represents the state of man still in Eden. These, again, this is speculative. I put these here to show you that there are different versions of the tree. The tree on the left, the one I already called the Minutum Mundum, is also called the Naples arrangement. It is the one that is used by both the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and its successors, and the AA. And assuming I don't know if there are successors to that, but if there are, they likely use that one too. The tree on the right is from the Lurianic tradition. That is the tradition of the Ari, the Baal Shem Tov of the Hasidic movement, I believe from the 1500s. But I might be wrong on that. I'm not wrong on the tree. The tree is definitely the Hebraic interpretation on it. And the paths that are on it are in a completely different order from the one that are all the way on the left. And now that I mentioned that, it is important to say why I mentioned that. I don't know anybody who uses the Gra, the middle version, but the other two versions, the one on the left and the right, there are lots of practitioners. So it is basically sort of like in science, such as in electricity. A physicist uses math in one direction, i.e. they might start adding negatives, and an engineer might start adding positives, or it's the other way around. But either way, one adds negatives, one adds positives, which is important so long as you just remember that. Because if you change these, if you add a negative to a positive, you're going to get a different result than adding two negatives or adding two positives. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. 2 plus negative 2 is equal to 0. So I'm trying to say about consistency. Whichever tree you decide that is your spiritual path, stick to it. Because these are very complex systems. They take many years at least a couple of years to really get it in your head. Excuse me. And then many more years to build up your wisdom in, to really build up your experience in. Thus, it is important to not be eclectic with which tree you use, or quite frankly, you'll confuse yourself. Because the tree is supposed to be a map of the entirety of the universe. So if you were to use one map to go cross country that's working for you, then you find another map that doesn't look the same, you may want to think twice about that second map when you already know the first map is working. You didn't think there'd be homework, did you? But how else do you get to learn this? And you're not reporting back to me anyway. This is for you to understand. These are the exercises I recommend. Draw the best tree of life you can. And you can totally use a compass or like a circle stencils, rulers, to make it look the best. Or you can do it freehand. I've done it both. I've done it multiple times. I've used colored pencils, crayons. I don't think I've ever used paint. It's just not my medium, but you can do that as well. This one is clearly graphical. There's a lot of things you can do. But just draw the best tree of life you can. Include planets, signs. Excuse me, by signs I mean zodiac signs, elements, etc. And etc. means there's a lot of things you can put on the tree. And there's a lot of sources you can find this stuff on. Aleister Crowley's book 777, and I don't think I have that in my reading list later, but that one will have a lot of these types of things. But you can add geomantic symbols if you're familiar with those. You can add I Ching. You can add the 8 trigrams. There's just so much you can add to this. Tarot cards. The more the merrier, because you're building a filing system for your mind so that you can look at something in nature, or you can discuss somebody's religion that is not yours, and now you can understand what they're talking about, because a light will go off in your head that's like, oh, well, that's just this on the tree of life. So before you may not have understood somebody else's culture, now you have armed with you the tree of life that has all of human experience within it. So even if your own traditions don't have all of the experience, it's likely somebody else does, and you can recognize it on the tree. What experiences do you attribute to each Sephirah? Why? Seriously. It's like, why? Because that helps you think these things out. It helps you contemplate the tree. And the more you do that, the more you bring it into your life. And this can be completely secular. Strictly speaking, you don't have to believe in the all or God for this to work. But if you do, every moment spent speculating, contemplating, meditating on the tree is a moment spent with divinity, with God, with the archangels and angels. And every moment you do that, you are rewarded. Whether it just be by a feeling of happy, happy, joy, joy, or whether it's synchronicities, just always having a parking space to find without effort, finding money on the street. It is amazing how much synchronicity will pick up, and not just for this tradition, but anyone who is really devout and really dedicates themselves to spirit. I know you may not have thought this was one of those, but this is just the author's experience with this. It can be very rewarding. And the more you work on the tree, you're working on yourself. So if you've had a problem finding a spouse, a girlfriend or a boyfriend, sometimes the answer is working on you. Maybe you're too abrasive. Maybe you're too passive. I don't know. Maybe you're passive enough. Maybe you're abrasive enough. But you won't know this until you really get to know yourself. What does each Sephirah mean to you, and why? Which Sephirah do you identify with the most? What about the least? Why? Which Sephirah do you most like? Most dislike? Why? And these are questions you can re-ask yourself later. And I always recommend to keep like a magical diary or a magical journal about this. Because people grow, people change, maybe not completely, maybe not even a lot, but they do. And it's good to have a record of this so you can kind of see what has made you different with time. Have you changed any views with time? When I was in my early 20s, I think I had vastly different views to my late 20s when I just wanted to get a job, and saving the world no longer seemed as important to me, for example, because I needed money to put gasoline in my tank, to put a roof over my house, and so forth. Whereas in my early 20s, I did have a job, but I pretty much could have fallen back into mom or dad helping me. Thus, I was free to think about saving the world, because it wasn't my money. It was somebody else's, for example. Point is people change over time. It's good to see how you changed, because that in itself might even give you a clue of how you change and how you learn, and then you can use that knowledge to grow even more. More exercises. Meditate on the tree. Be aware of the colors, the sounds, and the sense. For those of you who experience sense meditations, it is yet to happen for me, but others have reported this. Perhaps that is you. Visualize and feel the Sephiroth on each relevant body part. How does each Sephirah make you feel? Why? How do the Sephiroth relate to each other? Why? Are they complementary, antagonistic, neutral? If you are a fan of mythology, if you're very well knowledgeable in mythology, perhaps understanding various pantheons of gods might actually help understand how each Sephiroth is complementary or antagonist or neutral just by seeing how somebody else did it in their system, such as different pantheons. Meditate on the major arcana of the tarot to experience the paths. Contemplate the order of the paths. Each tarot card, each major arcana has a number from 0 to 22. There are two different ways you can meditate on the cards by going through them. Each way requires you to meditate on a single card per day. No more, no less. If you start with 1 and go to 22, like 1 on the first day, 2 on the second day, and so forth, you are basically acting out the descent from spirit into matter and the direction of creation. If you start with 22 the first day, then 21, then 20, you're now acting out initiation, going up the tree. What's important to do if you do it that way, let's just say you're going to start with 22. I think that's how I did it a couple years ago first. And I tried different decks with this as well. Be consistent. Seriously, if you stop like halfway through, you might feel a little inharmonious. I noticed even when I went up the tree, starting with the 22nd path, which leads from 10 to 9 on the tree, and then I'd go from 10 to 8 is the path after that, for example. Moving up the tree, once I moved into one direction, let's just say towards 8, I felt unbalanced until I finished the other two paths going to 7. So at least that was the thing for me. So you may notice something like that too. So if you're consistent, you may go through a period of imbalance over a day or two, but you'll be balancing yourself as you go through these paths. Now, this goes back to what I was talking about, different arrangements on the paths. Does the placement of the paths have a pattern? The answer to that is actually yes, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because nobody told me what it was. I just figured it out. And I don't want to rob you of that. I don't want to rob you of the ability to figure this out because it's very simple. There is a Golden Dawn version, which is the one that is shown here on the left. An Aleister Crowley version, which is shown a couple slides beforehand, which is basically the same tree, but with 2 of the paths interchanged. There's Isaac Luria's, called the Ari, the Lion's version. That was the Hebraic version. And that one actually kind of makes sense based on knowing that there are 3 mother letters, 7 planets, and 22 single letters. And then there's a Gra version that actually uses that same ideology. Does one version make more sense to you, and why? Contemplate the 4 worlds in your daily life. In fact, I actually explain the 4 worlds in order 1, 2, 3, 4. But right now I'm going to do it a little bit differently. Just look around. Find yourself an object and ask yourself, where did that object come from? You might be thinking, oh, it came from the store. And if you said, okay, well, before that, oh, it came from the factory. Before that, oh, I guess it came from pieces from the earth. Then I'd ask, so you're saying that, let's just say a cell phone, had individual pieces and it all came from the earth. Are you saying that the cell phone came from the earth? I mean, its pieces did, but you can't dig up a cell phone. But if you go one world back, there is a there is an idea of how to put together these parts, like a blueprint that precedes the physical building of the cell phone. And before the blueprint, preceding that, you had to have knowledge of electricity, knowledge of radios, transceivers, and since it's a smartphone, knowledge of computers and programming. So these are all things that needed to be understood before you can even make the blueprint. So that's the second world. We can understand how this is going to be all done. And the first world could just be as simple as the need to communicate at a vast distance, i.e. phone. That's what it's there for, to communicate at a distance. But contemplate the four worlds in your daily life. The more you do this, the more you can see the insanity of thinking everything's strictly matter. And I'm not trying to say that these worlds are separate. No, the four worlds are just a way to describe, basically just a way to describe and break up the oneness of, the one reality. Because we can't really know that. That's kind of hard. But when we break things up and just say, no, we've got the physical component, we got the intellectual component, the creative component, and the archetypical or need component. Like those are all interwoven with each other. They're not separated. We only separate them in our minds to better understand them. But when we do, we start to see the scope of things a little more clearly. Meditate on the tree on each of the four worlds by scrying into the minor arcana of the tarot. And again, you can start from 10 to 1, or you can do 10 to 1 or 1 to 10 per world. For example, what I would do is start with Earth, the discs. So day 1, you meditate on the Earth card. Really get into the card. You get that whole, gaze into that card until you can reproduce it in your mind's eye. Excuse me. Until you can reproduce it in your mind's eye. Then close your eyes and just go into it. See what you learn about it. Just do that, then come back out of the card into yourself. That's day 1. Day 2, the 9 of discs. Day 3, 8 of discs, all the way up until you get to the ace. And then you can do reverse order of the court cards in princess, prince, queen, king, at least for Hermetic and Thoth decks in that order. But you do this once a day, and you first do everything earth, which is discs, then everything air, which is swords, then everything water, which is cups, then everything fire, which is wands. And if you just start from the bottom and work all the way up to 1 on each of those, you're symbolically initiating yourself into these four worlds. You're getting to know your body in the earth, your intellect in the air, your creativity, emotions in water, and your will and motivations in fire. And again, finish what you begin. Contemplate God forms associated with each Sephirah. I will warn you that some of these are a little bit more advanced. So, especially with things like God forms, which is why I'm not telling you which God forms they are, but I will allude to the fact that I did give you some planets, and those planets were visibly on each of these slides. So, if you were to find, say, like an old picture of the Roman gods, that might give you a hint of what you're supposed to imagine yourself to be. But I wouldn't start off with that. Get to know the basics first. Because Kabbalah is ultimately a language of the subconscious. Once you know that language, once you know the language, you can start speaking in the language. Speaking to your subconscious in that language. And understanding what your subconscious is saying to you. Reading list. The Mystical Qabalah by Dion Fortune is a classic on the Tree of Life. A Practical Guide to Kabbalistic Symbolism by Gareth Knight, another classic. That goes through all the Sephiroth, i.e. the spheres, and all the paths. Whereas the Mystical Qabalah does the spheres, the Practical Guide does both spheres and paths. And there you may see quote-unquote dated connotations of certain types of people in Gareth Knight. If you really feel the need to be triggered by everything somebody from a I don't know, who's not in the current age, I guess, a psychologist might help you work through that, because this is ultimately a system of wisdom. So you're going to need to give up being triggered by everything that was not directed at you. But there is a little bit of that in Gareth Knight, just to warn you. Sefer Yetzirah. Now, I am familiar, and I've read two different translations. The Aryeh Kaplan version is the Judaic version, but it is a thick version with lots of commentary, images, and I highly recommend that one, just because of all the just because of everything that Aryeh Kaplan has done there to annotate it and to comment on it and to really help you understand it. And it's not something anyone, I think, is going to understand right away, but once you read it, it's in your subconscious. There's also the William Wynne Westcott version, which is, I would call it the Hermetic version. It's definitely shorter because, well, it's just a much shorter book. The Aryeh Kaplan version has not just one, but several even different versions of the Sefer Yetzirah. So for those of you who are academics and want to check different correspondences between what letters might mean, that's all there in the Aryeh Kaplan version. The Garden of Pomegranates by Israel Regardie is also a good book on the Kabbalah. The Book of Thoth by Aleister Crowley, though not technically on the Kabbalah, it's on his tarot, but it is chock full of Kabbalistic information, some of which is pretty obscure that you'll be reading it and be like, oh, I always wonder where that came from. Highly recommend that, and his actual tarot cards, the Book of Thoth. The Kybalion is not strictly, well, it's not Kabbalah. It is Hermetic philosophy. But if you are very intellectual and any of the stuff that we have talked about seems a little bit hokey to you, read Kybalion. That will give anyone who is primarily intellect, i.e. the people who doesn't care about your feelings if you can't logically argue, that person, the Kybalion will help a lot. And I'm a person like that. I don't care what your feelings are. I don't care if your feelings were hurt by logic or truth or facts or objective reality. I don't care. Take it up with your shrink. Kybalion is good for people like me, because people like me are less likely to just believe every superstition out there. In fact, I don't basically believe in superstition. The Kabbalah is real. All the concepts I just showed you prove that. All of us understand romantic love, even if it's been different for us. All of us understand beauty, even if we have a different concept of it. All of us understand what we mean by the intellect, of peace, of war, would be Gevurah. We all get that. Kybalion will help your intellect understand magic as something that's real. I want to thank you for listening, and I hope this has been a good primer for you. If it's been a little confusing, watch it again. This was designed both for the beginners, and for the beginners, kind of focus on what each individual sphere means. All the concepts that I've added in addition to that, I've added more for the advanced. The 4 worlds, I think, is really good for the beginners, because even if the tree of life as a whole seems a little complex and complicated, I think the 4 worlds are a little more accessible. And then all the patterns that I've added to the tree, just to show you that you can add so much to the tree, and I encourage you to do so. But the Kabbalah is for you. The Kabbalah is a living system. I hope that you can enjoy living the Kabbalah, and I thank you for your attention.